Here is a story told as it should be told, in the semi-darkness of a confessional room, where every word is a step towards the abyss. A Portrait in Ruins. Chapter 1. Fragile China. I confess, I always hated her smile. Not the smile itself, of course, but the way she wore it, like an expensive but ill-fitting dress. Ava, my daughter-in-law, my only son David's wife, was a masterpiece of falsehood. She would sit across from me at the polished oak dining table, her smile reflecting, distorted in the silverware, twisting into a grimace. She was too sweet, too compliant, too simple. A slip of a girl, a dandelion seed blown accidentally into my world of granite. David, my foolish, enraptured boy, saw a muse in her. I, a corporate surgeon, accustomed to cutting people in companies open to their rotting cores, saw only a meticulously crafted project. She wanted money and status. I wanted her gone. Our silent war was waged on the battlefield of politeness. My questions about her simple family were sniper shots disguised as pleasantries. Her answers, full of naive charm, were a smokescreen. David sat between us, beaming, happy, and utterly blind. He was the buffer, the layer of air that kept our poisons from mixing.
And then the air vanished. The call came at 3 in the morning. In my world, a call at that hour means either a market crash or a death. David's yacht, the Navigator, had been found off the coast, empty. The ship's log ended mid-sentence. There were no signs of a struggle, only an unfinished bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the deck. A storm, the Coast Guard informed me. A sudden squall. He was simply washed overboard. I vomited right there on the Persian rug in my study. But even through the wave of panic and encroaching grief, my lawyer's brain was already working, already searching for inconsistencies. David was an excellent yachtsman. He could feel the weather like an animal. He would never have let a storm catch him off guard. When I saw Ava, she was a perfect portrait of grief, pale with enormous tear-filled eyes. She pressed herself against me, her body trembling. I held her mechanically, feeling the taut string-like muscles beneath the thin silk of her robe. She was playing her part flawlessly, and in that moment I hated her even more, for not taking off her mask even in the face of tragedy. Or so I thought. The following days were a hell of condolences, empty gazes, and police reports. Everything pointed to an accident, but I didn't believe it. I went into David's study, the place I had furnished for him like a throne for an heir. Ava followed, quiet as a shadow. "I just want to smell his scent," she whispered. A lie. Like me, she was looking for answers. We stood in silence, 2 enemies on a field of ash. And then I noticed it. A seascape painting on the wall hung slightly askew. With my obsessive pedantry, I would never have allowed such a thing. I walked over and straightened.
The frame shifted, and I saw the dark slit of a safe behind it. I turned to Ava. Our eyes met, and for the first time I saw neither naivete nor sorrow in her gaze. I saw steel. She nodded. We both knew the code, his late mother's birthday. The door clicked open. Inside, there wasn't a portfolio of stocks or a last will. There was an accounting ledger and an encrypted flash drive. I opened the book. Names, dates, sums with 6 zeros, and annotations that made my blood run cold. These weren't business deals. They were debts, enormous, monstrous debts to people whose names are never mentioned in the light of day. My perfect son, my heir, was in over his head in filth I never knew existed. I looked up at Ava. Her face was devoid of all expression. "An accident?" she asked softly, and there was no question in her voice. It was a statement that our world of fine china had been shattered, and we, two people who hated each other, were left standing on the wreckage. We would have to clean it up together. Chapter 2. The First Cracks. Confession number 2. I found myself admiring her. In the first days of our forced alliance, I watched Ava, expecting hysterics, weakness, a mistake, all the things I was conditioned to expect from women I considered decorative. But she didn't break. She turned to ice. We sat in my study, now our war room, the air thick with whiskey and unspoken suspicions. I activated old connections, called men whose numbers I had hoped to never dial again, men who exist in the shadows of the law, in the gray zones of morality, where I was once an unrivaled master. They spoke to me reluctantly, in hints. Yes, David was known. Yes, he was a gambler, too much of a gambler for his own good. He owed the wrong people, very serious people.
Ava, meanwhile, was doing what I, with my linear legal mind, could not. She sifted through David's belongings, not as an investigator, but as an artist. She looked into his life, his habits, searching not for clues, but for disharmony. He started mixing his paints differently, she said one evening, standing before his unfinished canvas in the studio. Look, before he had light, even in the dark tones. But here there's only mud and fear. The colors are dead. She ran a finger over a thick smear of cobalt, and I saw what she meant. This wasn't just a painting. It was a suicide note drawn out over 6 months. One night, while poring over his bank statements, she suddenly froze. "Richard," her voice was quiet but sharp as a shard of glass. "Look at this." She pointed to a series of regular transfers to the account of a certain charity, the Foundation for Gifted Children from Disadvantaged Families. The amounts weren't huge, but they were consistent. "This doesn't look like a debt payment," she said. "This looks like atonement." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something more than cold calculation in her eyes. I saw a mind, sharp, analytical, capable of seeing patterns where I saw only chaos. I passed her a glass of whiskey. Our fingers brushed. It was like an electric shock, fleeting but searing. We both pulled our hands away as if from a fire. In that awkward silence, something cracked, the wall between us, or perhaps the armor around my heart.
I began to see her differently. I saw the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, the way she instinctively smoothed her hair when she spoke to the police, repeating the rehearsed legend of the tragic accident again and again. I saw in her not a cunning simpleton, but a fighter who, like me, was accustomed to wearing a mask to survive. The thought was unsettling. It demolished my comfortable worldview. If she wasn't who she appeared to be, then who was she? My hatred for her, once so clear and pure, began to cloud, to mix with a reluctant respect. And that was far more dangerous. You know how to destroy an enemy, but what do you do with someone who suddenly becomes your reflection in a warped mirror? That night, I had a dream. Ava and I were on David's yacht. A storm raged around us, but we weren't afraid. We were at the helm together, our hands intertwined. We were steering the ship straight into the heart of the storm, and I didn't know if we were saving it or sinking it. Chapter 3. Confession in the Gloom. The third confession, the most terrible one. I wanted her trust, not as an ally, as a woman. The thought was repulsive, a betrayal of David, of my late wife, of my entire respectable facade. But it was there, living in the twilight of the study, in the pauses between our words, in our accidental touches. The tension mounted with each passing day. One morning, I found a dead seagull on the hood of my car, a note tucked in its beak. Some debts are inherited. The threat was clear. We were no longer just investigators. We were targets. This shared danger bound us more tightly than any vows. It locked the two of us inside this vast, echoing house which had transformed from a fortress into a prison. That night, the rain poured down. It hammered against the glass, as if trying to break through, to wash away all our lies. We sat in the library. A bottle of old scotch was nearly empty. Ava was silent, staring out the window where streams of water ran like tears. There was so much loneliness in her silhouette, reflected in the dark glass, that I couldn't bear it. "I destroyed everything once, too," I said, my voice sounding hoarse and alien. She turned slowly. Her eyes seemed bottomless in the half-light. She was waiting. And I, who had spent decades building walls of cynicism and secrets around myself, suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to tear them down. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the fear. Or maybe I was just tired of being a stone effigy. "I wasn't always like this," I began, looking not at her but at my old sin, which was always before my eyes. "When I was young, I had a mentor, a friend. He believed in me. He taught me everything, poured his soul into me. He was a genius, but far too trusting. We were working on a major case, a corporate merger, and I saw a loophole, a chance to not just win, but to take everything. I could either remain loyal to him or become the man I am today." I took a swallow. The whiskey burned my throat. I chose the latter. I used his ideas, his trust, and I stabbed him in the back. I destroyed him, ruined him, made it so he could never work in his profession again. He was branded a fraud, and I became a hero. My entire career, this house, David's inheritance, it's all built on the bones of one good man. I fell silent, expecting judgment, contempt, everything I deserved. But Ava remained quiet. She came over, took my glass, and set it on the table. Then she sat in the armchair across from me, so close I could see the gold flecks in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. Her voice didn't waver. There was no pity in it, no revulsion, only understanding, a frightening, all-encompassing understanding. "Because I look at David, at the mess he got himself into, and I know I'm the one who made him this way," I exhaled. "I taught him that the end justifies the means, that the world is made of predators and prey. I poisoned him with my philosophy, and now that poison has killed him." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cool and smooth. The gesture was more intimate than a kiss. It was an absolution I didn't deserve. And in that moment, in this damned library, With the sound of the rain, I knew I was lost. I looked at my son's wife, my daughter-in-law, and saw in her the only person in the world who might be able to understand me. I didn't know that her understanding wasn't based on compassion. It was based on knowledge. She knew my story better than I did myself, because she was its integral, most terrifying part.
Chapter 4. Portrait of the Father. Confession number 4. I am a brilliant lawyer. My brain is a machine for analyzing facts and identifying discrepancies. But around her, that machine had been malfunctioning. Feelings, like rust, were corroding the gears of logic. Sooner or later, however, even a broken machine stumbles upon a piece that doesn't fit. That piece turned up in the most unexpected place. We kept digging. The people David owed money to were not just mobsters. They were a kind of financial cult, a predatory entity that lured in golden youths and then bled them dry. I found the name of their leader, a man who always remained in the shadows, Leonard Kovacs. The name meant nothing to me, but it gnawed at me. The breakthrough came when Ava was going through her old things, which she'd moved into the house after the wedding, ostensibly looking for photos of David for the memorial service. She laid out snapshots on the table. Here she was as a little girl with 2 pigtails. Here she was in a prom dress. A sweet, simple biography in pictures. And suddenly, from between the pages of a book, a small yellowed photograph fell out, one she immediately tried to conceal. But I was quicker. I took it. In the photo, she was very young, about 17. She was standing next to a tall, haggard man with sad eyes. He had his arm around her shoulders. His face, it was older, thinner, but I'd have recognized him in hell. It was Arthur, my mentor, my friend, the man I had destroyed, Arthur Kowalski. The world tilted, all sound ceased. I looked from the photograph to her. Ava, Kovacs, Kowalski. My brain, finally free from the rust of emotion, began to work with frantic speed. She had changed her name, invented a history. She had spent years getting close to my family. This was no accident. It was a special operation. My confession in the library, her understanding gaze, her comforting touch. It wasn't empathy. It was mockery. It was her savoring the moment her enemy voluntarily placed his own head in the noose. She had listened to the story of her own father's destruction and must have been barely able to contain her triumph. I raised my eyes to hers. She stood there, pale as a sheet, watching me. All her softness, all her fragility had vanished. Before me stood a stranger, a cold, unfamiliar woman, an actress who had just finished her greatest performance. She knew that I knew. The game was over. The silence in the room rang so loud it hurt my ears. I slowly placed the photograph on the table, right on top of the chart of David's deaths. 2 puzzles slid together to form one hideous picture. Kowalski, I said. A single word, not a question, but a verdict. It contained everything, my discovery, her betrayal, the collapse of the fragile, impossible bond that had grown between us. She didn't look away. The shadow of a smile touched her lips, that same smile I had always hated, but now I finally understood its nature. It wasn't a mask, it was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at my heart.
In that moment, I realized that David's disappearance was merely the overture. The real tragedy was unfolding here and now, in this room. And I was not a spectator, but the lead actor. Chapter 5. The Ruins. And here is my final confession, the last one. In that instant, when all the masks were gone, I didn't feel hatred. I felt horror and admiration. Standing before me was not just an avenger. Standing before me was a masterpiece, a perfect plan, perfectly executed. I, Richard Gray, master of intricate plots, had been outplayed by the daughter of the man I considered a weakling. It was almost poetic. "Yes," she said, and her voice was as hard as granite. "My name is Kowalski, Ava Kowalski." She walked to the table and picked up the photograph of her father. He died 3 years ago, of a heart attack, in poverty and obscurity. But before he died, he told me everything, about you, about your betrayal. He didn't ask for revenge. He asked me to forget, but I couldn't. She surveyed the room. "I wanted to take everything from you, just as you took everything from him. Not the money. Money is dust. I wanted to take your future, your son, your pride, your legacy." She told me everything. How she had crafted her legend for years. How she had enrolled in the same university as David. How she had engineered their accidental meeting. How she had played the role of the naive muse for my vain son. Her confession was cold, methodical, like a pathologist's report. But there were 2 variables in my plan that I didn't account for. She looked me straight in the eye for the first time, and there was no longer triumph in her gaze, only an infinite weariness. The first was David himself. I thought he was just a golden boy, an empty shell. I didn't know about his debts, his second life. He was already running toward his own destruction. I just gave him a little push. His games turned out to be more dangerous than mine. She paused, taking a breath. And the second variable was you. My heart skipped a beat. I came here to hate a monster, a ruthless predator, and I found a broken man, drowning in his own guilt, a man who confessed to me his son's killer as if I were a priest. I was supposed to enjoy it, every second, but I couldn't. Her voice cracked. When you touched my hand that night, I felt not revulsion. I felt the same thing you did, and that was more sickening than any revenge. We stood in the middle of the library, surrounded by papers, clues, and ghosts of the past. Ruins. She was right. That's all that was left. The mystery of David's disappearance faded, becoming an insignificant detail against the backdrop of our personal catastrophe. He was only the catalyst, the fuse that lit the bomb I had planted 30 years ago. I was the man who had destroyed her family. She was the woman who had destroyed mine. We were enemies, bound by betrayal. We were allies, bound by a shared secret. And most terrifying of all, we were 2 lonely souls who had, for a fleeting moment, seen salvation in each other, only for it to prove a mirage. I walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I held one out to her. She took it. Our fingers brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. We stood in silence, 2 survivors of a shipwreck we had caused ourselves. Enemies, almost lovers, accomplices. Her plan for revenge had failed. My life was destroyed. What now? Hatred? Forgiveness? War? Or something worse, an attempt to build something new on these damned, blood-soaked ruins? I didn't know the answer. I only looked into her eyes and understood that my personal hell was just beginning, and I would burn in it with her. This was my punishment, and perhaps my only redemption. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel, and you'll hear even more captivating tales.